Hi, I'm Ed Marsh. Welcome to Common Sense.
And I'm John McTighe. 1776 was an interesting year, and in this series, we talk about Thomas Paine, the author of Common Sense. And back then, his mission was really to try to persuade the colonists, the people living here in the U.S., that it was time to overthrow the British and send them back to the UK, or I guess it was England back then. And if you think about it, that was a pretty tall order because many of us were immigrants from England and Ireland and other places. And a lot of us came to the U.S. hoping for a better way of life and to start a farm or a small business. And many of us were dependent on the British for all kinds of trade. And to throw them out was kind of an interesting idea, and it was a tough sell. So we're going to be talking about selling today and how it's evolved since 1776 wasn't the beginning of sales. I mean, we've been doing sales since we crawled out of the primordial soup, but things have changed in the past 10, 20 years. What are your perspectives, Ed, on how things have changed in the past couple of decades?
Well, we may not be asking people to pledge their lives and honor and livelihood the way they did back then, but gosh, it sure feels like sometimes the sales projects are that hard. The status quo just is this daunting thing to overcome. There's some obvious things that have changed, obviously. Information symmetry. The buyers know as much as the sellers know, and more in many cases, because unfortunately many salespeople aren't as consistently researching and educating themselves as they should. And buyers have a very intense period of education. Team buying, I think, has absolutely become much more common. I mean, it used to be you could talk about the decision maker. You could talk about the champion as being the primary person. In this case, the champion really is more an information conduit, a member of a committee where anyone can say no and everyone has to say yes, and you don't actually get to talk to many of them. That's certainly a big change. Buyers used to use salespeople to get the information they needed because salespeople were the gateway, but with information symmetry, that doesn't matter. Now what buyers are looking for is insights. They want salespeople to really be consultants, not in that kind of hackneyed business card title, sales consultant sort of a way, but really understanding their business, being able to come in and help them uncover problems they have that they didn't realize and help them understand better ways to run their business. Those are some of the things that I see consistently. But obviously that means that there's changes in the approaches, and there's some kind of classic old school sales approaches. There's some intermediate ones that people have tried more recently. To talk about that evolution that you've seen in sales models and schools of thought and sales approaches.
Yeah, it's interesting. You and I have been in sales for 30 plus years, and things really have changed a lot. I think when we both started out, probably both went through some kind of methodology training, at least early on. Like Ziegler was one of the first that was out there, and I think you went through that one, right?
I remember that, and yeah.
So some of the others as well, but Ziegler was all about overcoming obstacles to sales. So really, a salesman's job was to persuade someone to do something, usually to buy something. And there were 5 obstacles that were identified: need, money, urgency, desire, and trust. And you had to persuade them to get over all of these humps in order to move forward and close a deal. And then I think a little bit later on, a few years ago, Sandler methodology, very famous also worldwide, and pretty similar. It's all about overcoming obstacles, but the approach is a little bit nuanced. Now you're really talking with your prospect about these obstacles. You're coming forward with it. You're not being so sneaky about trying to overcome these obstacles. And then a little bit later on, we had Miller Hyman was another methodology, and that one was about actually focusing on the members of that buyer's team that you talked about and focusing in on their particular interests, strengths, and weaknesses, and sort of a divide and conquer approach. So you try to find someone who is more of an advocate on the team, and then work your way through the team to try to convince them one by one. A little bit later on, just maybe 10 years ago, the consultative sale approach came along, and that was really more about, we're not going to try to be quite as pushy. We're not going to try to sell product as much. And instead, we're going to focus on selling a solution to a buyer that's maybe more than just the product. Maybe it has some support component to it. It's more tailored to what their interests actually are, their needs. And it's about building a trust relationship, a consultative relationship with a prospect. Then just a few years ago, some of these acronyms started popping up, and you see each one of these in a sales book out there. So there's SPIN, which is situation, problem, implication, and then need payoff. So that's all about going through step by step, identifying what the actual needs are, how it fits in with a prospect's situation, like, for example, where they are in their career or where they're likely to be, and how that a sale may help them get to their personal goals as well as business goals. Then there's SNAP selling, which is simple, invaluable, align, and priorities. Sort of the same idea, only you're trying to make the experience a little bit more streamlined, a little bit easier on the buyer. You're not trying to force things down their throat as much, and you're trying to be more and more of a peer in a way, or someone who's a partner maybe in the process. Then take that a step forward, and you have the challenger sale in recent years, and this actually takes it to another level, where the sales rep is actually really a consultant now, and is really more like a peer than he is a vendor. So you're responsible for tailoring the experience to the user again, but pushing back, sort of taking charge, becoming more of an expert on your prospect's needs and your prospect's challenges. So it does involve really a lot more expertise, a lot more understanding of the buyer's situation, and then not being afraid to, challenge their beliefs and their habits. And all of these cases, there's an evolution. You can sort of tell towards being closer to the buyer, being a little more trusted, being more valuable to the buyer. And I think we've gotten away from, or we're starting to at least get away from, the old sort of push selling, the old overcoming objections selling. What are your thoughts on that? And how does this really address the buyer's needs?
Well, the interesting thing about all of those, I love the way you laid out that continuum, showing how it's evolved, how it's gone from being kind of that manipulative sort of a relationship to being one that's really much more focused on helping the buyer get what they ought to have. And that's not necessarily always what they think they need. The real breakdown over the last several years, though, is that all of those models are predicated on getting face-to-face meetings, sitting there with a person and going through that methodology, whichever one you wanted to practice. And so the breakdown that happens now is you're not invited in for most of those meetings. You're not getting through to people to set up those meetings in many cases. And so the real trick is not only what do buyers want, but how do they want it? And the answer is they want it on their terms, on their time, whether it's on their tablet Saturday morning, on their desktop at 11 at night when they're catching up, on their phone while they're sitting on the train commuting, whatever the case may be. So it's got to be virtual. And this sales model, obviously, at some point, a person becomes involved. It could be in the background, helping to serve information at the right time through cues that they're getting, or it could be directly in meetings. And obviously, there are still face-to-face meetings that happen, but they don't happen early on for this kind of get-to-know-you sort of a thing like they used to. Mm-hmm. When buyers are actively looking, they're looking for insights. They're looking for answers to questions. They're looking for, I love that expression that Marcus Sheridan uses about they ask, we answer. I mean, if we really focused our effort on understanding the questions that people are asking, not about our product or service, but about their business, and we start answering those questions, then the discussion about our product or service becomes almost a natural extension of that, because we're helping them, we're giving them insights, we're helping them answer the questions that they're asking about their business. And that's why LinkedIn research finds that 74% of the time, buyers ultimately select, B2B buyers ultimately select a vendor that first provided value as they were trying to understand their problem. As they were asking those questions, who's actually answering them? Not rambling on about their product or service, but speaking to their issues. The other thing that certainly buyers want is help managing that team buying process. That champion that wants your stuff, that needs it to help accomplish the personal and professional goals they have in their department, needs somehow to get the finance and HR and engineering and IT and all the other folks that are part of that buying team, they need to get them aligned, and those other departments don't care about it. So they want help. They want the tools. They want us to educate them so that they can go and sell to their team members. I guess the real trick, though, comes in many cases when buyers don't even know what the problem is they're trying to solve. They may think there's something amiss, or they may just be content and kind of rambling along, hoping it's going to take care of itself. So I guess my next question for you is, how often do you think buyers even really know what they want?
Well, it depends on what kind of sale you were talking about. But in most cases, if it's the first sale, for example, to your company or from your company, they probably don't know much at all about it. It's really kind of a feel your way along approach at the beginning. Maybe they have some indicators. Maybe there's some problems that are higher level, a little more general, like declining sales, or a lot more returned items, or more flaws, or more things that don't necessarily lead you to think that you need to buy something, but they are problems. And so they might very well turn to each other. They might turn to their colleagues, but more often than not nowadays, they're going to a search. So a primary search would be for similar situations or similar solutions, similar problems that other people in the industry are having. So that first search, and then that may lead you to narrow things down and start putting a committee together to study the problem, sort of acknowledge that there is a problem. And from there, you start to really kind of bring in more experts and try to figure out what's going on, which could lead to even more searches. So if you, the vendor, aren't present in those searches by virtue of content that's helpful, videos, whatever it might be that addresses some of those high-level concerns, you're not even on their radar. You're not even in that buyer journey until maybe much later, when they identify a specific solution that they want. And as you said, the vendor that's there first with the most value is going to be the one that wins. And if you're not that person, you lose. So that's kind of an outline of the early stages. And then the problem there from there on is that a lot of times doing nothing is easier than doing something about it. And the cost of doing nothing is less than the at least assumed cost of doing something about the problem. And then they might impose really ridiculous return on investment criteria that just don't match the severity of the situation, or they don't match the solution itself. So that might be another reason to sort of shoot down the whole project and move on to something else. So what are these buyers looking for? I mean, how can we appeal to them? How can we get past some of this? I guess you could consider these objections, but they're really more like just impediments to moving forward that are kind of ingrained.
All right. So given that the status quo is such a powerful competitor, I mean, the key, what they're looking for is a reason that they should that they should change. And the cost, even if you could document the fact that there's a high cost to continuing what they're doing, that's already embedded cost. It's not an out-of-pocket cost. They're already paying that. They're already bearing that. And so even though you think you can help offset that with an investment in something else, spending new money feels very different than continuing to spend, perhaps inadvisedly, the money that they're already spending. In my experience, the key, what they're really looking for initially, we've trained buyers so that initially they're looking for specs and details. I mean, they come, they say, okay, I figured out what I need. I want to know how many horsepower or how many feet per minute or how many megabytes or how many people have to be trained or all those kinds of attributes. But if you can spend some time working with them, or if they've done really more holistic research, in the end, what they're looking for is not those details. They're looking for outcomes. They're looking for a better situation. It could be higher productivity. It could be more throughput. It could be lower costs. It could be reduced energy consumption. It could be less turnover. They're looking for whatever that outcome is that's going to help their business make more or save more. And the struggle that we have in many cases is that we answer the first question, which is the details or the specs or the data sheet kind of stuff about a product, how you push that button or how you run this report. And we don't ever really talk about the outcome that they want solved. And so then we never even get a chance to talk about how we're going to minimize the hassles and how overcoming the status quo will be. Sure, there's a transition, but it's a much lower barrier to overcome than many people assume it is when they're just so stressed out and have no time to work on anything. So we can kind of paint this picture of what the outcomes are, but along the way, the other question that we have to keep in mind is how are buyers measuring progress, and how are they measuring the achievement to know, are they on the right track?
Yeah, I think they get that wrong a lot in my experience. They're measuring the wrong thing, or it's not appropriate to the outcome. So if you're looking for profitability, that's a pretty obvious one. You want to measure profit. But there's other things that go along with that could also be really more tuned in to the ultimate problem that they're facing. For example, lifetime value of a customer, or the cost to acquire a customer. Those might be out of whack and causing you to reduce profit. And then there's the percent of recurring revenue or churn and retention rates. How much of that has an impact on profitability. So you'd want to measure multiple things that could be indicative of the real problem and also show you that you're making real progress. But then there are other types of outcomes that you should be thinking about, like marketing metrics, like what's your market share, what kind of penetration do you have in the market, and what kind of growth in sales. So that might be a completely different set of outcomes. Or maybe you're more focused on the investor community, so investor metrics like market cap, share value, and growth versus expectations of the analysts. So these are all things that could be impacted by some sort of purchase or some kind of movement into a new technology, for example. And these are things that you'd want to measure the right metric in order to see whether you're succeeding or not. And I guess the question that most would have is then, how can you move the needle in these areas? What kinds of programs or technologies, as I mentioned, or strategies can you put in place to help move these metrics?
Well, of course, the specifics depend on the industry and the challenge that a company is trying to overcome. But what that goes to, that's the question, in essence. That's kind of the embedded question that they're asking Google, or that they may be asking a sales rep when they finally talk to them, or maybe they're asking a chat on a website. And the answer comes not from your standard blurb about what your product or service does. The answer comes from how you've helped others in similar industries, how you understand the world in which they live, how you've helped to increase profitability, how you've helped, you use the case of example of customer acquisition cost. I've seen companies that just assume that marketing is really expensive, but then when they look at what it costs for field sales to go and develop leads and sell them compared to what it costs for marketing to create really well-qualified leads, they're shocked at how much less expensive it could be for them to acquire customers than they've assumed by actually spending money in an area that they've traditionally hesitated to, which is marketing. So it's not always trying to figure out what's out of whack high and try to cut it. Sometimes it's actually recognizing opportunity to make progress on things in a less expensive way. But at that core, understanding how other companies similar to theirs have accomplished what they're trying to do really goes to that challenge of sale model. And that last in the progression, that continuum of sales models that you described, that's so well kind of developed for today's buyer challenges. It really fits with that challenge of sales model. The trick is then how do you do that virtually if the sales reps aren't getting a meeting? So how have you seen challenge of sale effectively implemented in this virtual sales world?
Well, it's often not implemented, which is a big problem. And the reason, that's actually the reason that one of the biggest reasons that companies complain about sales is that the sales reps that they talk to just don't know what they're talking about. They don't know the first thing about the industry.
Right.
In fact, their whole idea of prospecting is just to go out and find people who are qualified financially. They don't necessarily look into the details about the industry itself or the company itself, the products, their customers. So what that needs to be completely turned around. The buyer and the sales rep really change places in a way. I mean, the sales rep becomes an advocate and becomes someone who's really committed and even passionate about helping the buyer become more successful in reaching their goals. So they need to be an expert in the industry. They need to do the research, take the time, and find out who their competitors are. For example, what are the market forces that are going on? What kind of buyers does that company have, and what are they looking for? So it's really kind of a combination of sales and marketing and really market research all kind of rolled into one, where you're finding out everything you need to know. And you're really looking for things that the buyer doesn't know. So the buyer may not know what's going on within their own company, for example. They're not keeping their eye on that. So there may be moves, personnel moves, or there may be, divisions that are changing here and there, or product lines that are changing. They may not even know that because they're not keeping their eye on it. So things like that, and then just staying on top of publications and speaking engagements and all those sorts of things, make you a much more valuable ally in this process, and helps the buyer really visualize those outcomes you were talking about. And there's no reason why you couldn't do it virtually, to your point. I mean, a lot of this research certainly would be done online, and then there's no reason why using social media, using video, you could communicate on a regular basis and just, become basically that peer that they're really looking for. So how would that impact the sale, the buyer journey, so to speak? What kinds of direct outcomes would there be from that kind of challenger relationship?
So I think that it changes the perspective of a salesperson. The sales process or sales engagement is not as discreet and as short as it used to be. You used to ask qualifying questions, make sure it was a budget, make sure you're talking to the decision maker, pitch the product, and then ask for an order. And now it could well be that if you're selling, let's say you're selling some sort of an energy efficiency solution into a manufacturing facility, and you find out that the number one overwhelming priority that they have is workforce and talent management because of how hard it is to find qualified and skilled employees these days. Maybe what you end up doing over the course of the first several months of your relationship is sharing tips that you're getting from other companies in the area, other clients, people that you're reading about or talking to that maybe have innovative programs with local vocational technical programs that can help create a feeder program for skilled employees, unrelated to what you're trying to sell, but you're becoming a resource for that buyer that will build that credibility, build that trust, and give you the opportunity to have a more in-depth conversation about energy savings, once they're over that immediate hurdle. People tend to go immediately to features and benefits and comparing to competitors. The competitor, in many cases, won't even be a relevant factor. Going back to that 74% statistic, if you've done this right, they may get a couple other quotes, but they're going to be they're going to be quotes. And they will end up buying 3/4 of the time from the company that first provided that value to them. So it's easy to go into that rabbit hole of talking about competitors and actually selling against yourself when it's not even really a substantial consideration that they have. That sense of being a resource and of helping them, and that commitment, that real genuine internal salesperson commitment to do that sort of thing, you have to balance that against quota and against the need to be talking to qualified buyers that you're going to be able to sell. But if you can take that longer term perspective and not necessarily be as focused on quarterly numbers, but understand that doing this kind of upfront work, in complex sales, is different than in low consideration sales. In complex sales, you have to build that trust and that relationship, and that's a great way to do it. As much as we think we understand what we do is worth, though, what it's worth to a buyer, the question is, how do they perceive it, and how do you understand the way they perceive the value of it, and how do you help them kind of quantify what the value of what you're selling is going to be to them?
That's probably the best lesson I've learned over the years, is not to sell a product or a service because they don't perceive any value to a product or a service. It doesn't have any impact until it's applied.
Right.
Even when it's applied, if it's not applied the right way, it may not drive the right outcomes that you were talking about. So really the important thing is to get across what that outcome is going to be. Is it going to produce a certain amount of new revenue? Is it going to save a certain amount in cost? Is it going to allow you to achieve your goals faster, and how much faster? Or is it going to do something else, like move your brand ahead in the marketplace, or allow you to move into a new market that you weren't in before? So those are all tangible goals that you could actually quantify during the process of this challenger sale, putting together really a plan, not just a product that gets implemented. So how would you go about, and I know we've both done this, go about selling on value like that rather than on products and services?
Well, that's part of the reason I love the challenger model, because I think it comes back to understanding their business. I mean, if you just talk in abstract about, this is my product or service and it will have an ROI of 3x, so it'll help you in a perfect world, sky's blue, humidity's 50%, it does this for your business. Everyone's heard those pitches, and they're of little value. On the other hand, if you really understand the business challenges they have, whether it's because you've run business yourself or you've worked within a number of them helping to overcome this specific kind of a challenge, and you've got a track record of documented outcomes based on that, then you speak about the challenge, you speak about the cost of the challenge, you speak about the value of overcoming that challenge. It could either be an increase, more revenue, more profitability, more market share, or it could be a decrease, lower energy costs, lower turnover in employees, whatever the case may be, depending on your product or service. But the only way to sell value is to help establish value, and the only way to establish value is based on real business change, which they won't be able to confirm until after you've done it. And that's why the status quo wins, because they've heard from so many people, oh yeah, no problem, we can do this. But when you can speak the language and convey through the questions you ask, the comments you make, the observations you offer, the insights that you provide, that you really understand, not just according to some 8.5 by 11 list of bullet points, but in your gut and in your experience, you understand, then they'll, in my experience, they're willing to listen to your explanation of what the outcome will mean in terms of value to them.
Yeah, and I think the surveys that have been done lately back that up. That's actually what buyers are really looking for, is that relationship and that trust and that easy buying experience, because they now understand what's needed and they have the ammunition they need to convince the rest of the team, which is another big problem that a lot, if you just reach out to one person in a team, then they have that challenge of going forward and convincing the rest of them, and they may not really understand how.
So we know all this stuff, but
Yeah.
companies still miss the mark. How and why and where are they missing the mark?
Well, it's pretty easy to tell. All you have to do is visit their websites, and really all they do is talk about their products and their brand, and that's it. It's up to you to figure out whether this product is worthwhile, and maybe you get in touch with the salesperson who qualifies you real fast and decides whether to send you an email or not, and then they send you an email that has just more of the same in it,
Right.
more product brochures, more a demonstration invitation. So now I have to commit my time to do something I'm really not clear on whether or not it's even worth anything to me. So the sites that are winning, the companies that are winning, are really focusing on value and really putting out their stories that tell how they're going in and impacting companies by going through this challenger process, and results that are actually being generated. So it's a pretty day and night situation as far as sales and marketing goes. But it's a big challenge. You're really talking about changing everything, your whole mindset, as we've discussed before, and turning everything around to be really focused on the customer. So I'm wondering, I'm sure most people are wondering kind of how you get there, and what kind of first steps can you take to start turning around the sales process, the sales mindset?
Well, I don't know if it's good news or bad news, but I think that what it takes is some trauma. In my experience, very, very, very rarely does somebody suddenly get religion. Driving into work one morning, they realize, oh, we've been doing this wrong. We're going to start doing it differently as of tomorrow. It either takes a new CEO that's got new goals, coming in, breathing fire, wants to get things done. It takes some sort of a significant financial event in the history of a company that threatens it or prompts some introspection in how they ought to be doing things. It can be done by somebody who says, look, we need to improve, but it's a heavy lift. And so normally it takes some sort of a trauma event. The good news is when that happens, most companies still have plenty of time to react to it. I mean, it's not like this is something where they can't possibly catch up. Particularly in the industrial world, most companies are failing to do this very well. And so, although if you're a software company, you've got a heavy lift to try to catch up with your peers because they've been doing a better job of this in general. In the manufacturing space, that's not the case. There's still a fairly green field and an opportunity to catch up. I think your first step that you outlined is absolutely right. It's got to be a top-level management mindset commitment. It's got to be a recognition of the fact that the way we buy is dissonant from the way that we sell. We're buying in a new way. We're selling in the way we have for years. And for management that's grown up in a company, walked through the building, from the shipping dock to the front office for the last 25 years and has seen the salespeople in their bullpen working the phones, that's just the natural expectation of the way, the earth orbits the sun. Salespeople work their phones. That's the way it works. And of course, it takes a different approach. And so that mindset is in high-level management is really key. And from there, then they can begin to implement some of the other steps that we've talked about, the consolidation of the silos across a revenue growth continuum, and a focus on digital and an understanding of the buyer's journey, and creating content that answers questions, and all of the other kinds of things that cascade from that, and certainly improving their website so it helps provide the value virtually to buyers according to a challenger model. But there's more than that mindset. There's a lot of those steps along the way to really virtualize that challenger model and make it effective. Based on your experience, companies that do it well, what are the key things that they're doing to help them pull that off?
Well, I don't think you have to do it all at once. I think that would be a heavy lift, as you said. So a good place to start is really looking at your sales process. How does that actually work? How well aligned is sales and marketing with customer service? How are you utilizing CRM? We've talked about that before in one of our sessions. So there are certain things that you can do that are relatively quick wins, that may involve some training, that may involve a little technology here and there, but mostly it's going to involve the different silos, at least those three, agreeing to work together. And you can start to see some improvement towards some of your revenue goals right away, which is also very helpful in keeping momentum going for the rest of the change that's needed. So I would start there. And I think, we need to get into more detail about how to do that. So in our next session, we're going to talk more specifically about sales, marketing, and customer service alignment.
From that customer perspective, and maybe we'll even talk, one of the great things I've seen some companies do is take a stuffed animal and put it in the corner seat of the conference table and make sure every conversation that company has is for that, that customer that's sitting at the corner of the table rather than inwardly focused. So I'll look forward to that next conversation. I'll look forward to more common sense from you.
Same here. Have a good one. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much.